And lastly, if you want to say hi, please type your name and where you're from in the chat box. If you're calling in on a phone, you won't be able to do this, but don't worry, we still know you're with us. So why are we all here tonight? Central to the NHS New Deal is the conviction that big corporations should be stopped from ripping off our NHS. Why should corporate executives and shareholders be allowed to profit at the expense of patients and people's lives? It's morally wrong, and in the case of Big Pharma, the profit-driven model that we rely on to deliver the drugs we need is making CEOs and shareholders rich, while increasing numbers of patients can't get the treatment that they need. And the NHS is increasingly faced with a spiraling drugs bill. Just Treatment is a patient-led organisation, and back before we launched the NHS New Deal, we were already working closely with patients, particularly those with breast cancer, hepatitis C, and cystic fibrosis, who had struggled to access the drugs they needed on the NHS because the drug companies had priced them so highly. We believe that the pharmaceutical industry needs a radical rethink and that patients' lives should be at the forefront instead of pharma company profits. Huge levels of public funding goes into drug development, but this is not reflected in the amount of money we then pay to access them. Instead, pharmaceutical companies are increasingly using the monopolies they hold on drugs to extract sky-high prices from the NHS, leading to long battles over access, with drugs being rationed and patients going without the treatment they need. This cannot be right. There are big battles ahead, but we have a history of winning campaigns against the odds in the face of a powerful pharmaceutical industry, and we'll be hearing more about that shortly. So, without further ado, here's a quick rundown of tonight's agenda. So first up, I'll be handing over to Izzy, who's going to tell us about her involvement in taking on Big Pharma. Then we're going to hear from James, who will take us through the latest in the campaign for a people's vaccine. We'll then have a short question and answer session. So if at any point you have questions during Izzy and James's talk, you can ask them in the chat and we'll then ask them after. Then we're going to hear from Jaman, who's going to give an update on the NHS New Deal campaign, explain our current organising plans and how you can get involved. And finally, I'll run through the key asks and actions that we need you to take to help build support for an NHS New Deal win and a health system that puts patients before profit. And lastly, if you're on social media, obviously, please help us spread the word by using the hashtag NHS New Deal. So now I'd like to hand over to Izzy to kick us off. Remember, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentations. So please do post any questions you have for either Izzy or James in the chat, and then we'll try and answer as many as we can. So over to you, Izzy.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, cool. So hey everyone, I am a health writer and a patient leader for Just Treatment. And as Mariam has just been explaining, we're a patient-led campaigning organisation that seeks to put patients before profits in politics. And we're helping to gain access to medications and fight for a healthcare system. I have cystic fibrosis, and this means I rely on 4 hours of medication each day and constant hospital admissions to stay alive. And the unpredictable nature of my illness means that I could be hit with agonising pancreatitis, or I wake up with severe chest pain with no warning. And like so many others, I rely on the NHS and on timely access to new drugs that could help control my illness. But I've been forced to fight for access to drugs that I needed because of the greed of a pharmaceutical company, Vertex. For years, they were happy to use cystic fibrosis patients like me as pawns, as they demanded astronomical prices for drugs that could literally save lives. In 2019, we saw the end of a 5-year fight for access to a life-changing cystic fibrosis drug called Orkambi. Vertex had put such a high price on it that our NHS simply couldn't afford it. And a few months before the deal was made, my doctors told me that I had the correct mutations to take Simkevi, which is a sister drug, which has now also been made available on the NHS. But at the time, access to these medications, which carried an unaffordable price tag of £100,000 per patient per year, still didn't seem very hopeful. And the 5-year battle to get Vertex to lower its price saw many lose hope and also their lives. I took part in campaigning for Orkambi through writing about my experiences of living with CF and those in desperate need of these medications. And I spoke at conferences and attended protests in the hope that a deal would be made between Vertex and the NHS. And in winter 2019, after 5 years of waiting and people with CF getting more sick, we finally got access. At the same time, Just Treatment were running a high-profile campaign for access to Orkambi, which was led by patients and parents of kids with CF, demanding that the government use its power to break Vertex's monopoly, helping parents and patients to set up a buyers club so that they could buy a generic version of the medication made in Argentina. And this put huge pressure on Vertex. This campaigning forced the company back to the negotiating table and finally led to a big deal being made between Vertex and the NHS. This form of patient-led campaigning was exactly why I wanted to be involved in Just Treatment, and is why I've joined as a patient leader. Having patient experience at the forefront, with the main critique being directed at big pharma, was really important to me. The NHS is so stretched and underfunded, and big pharma are constantly putting it under even more strain. Those who developed this life-saving medication needed to lower the price and stop dictating the value of my life. They shouldn't have been allowed to have that kind of power over anybody's life. But getting access to Orkambi was bittersweet. Campaign groups alongside patients and family members of those with CF have been campaigning tirelessly since 2015 to gain access, and the fight saw loved ones with CF die whilst waiting. This is something which should never have been allowed to happen, and the cruelty of the situation really hit me once with one access. Vertex could have lowered their price at any point if they genuinely wanted patients to have access. They were making incredible profits on the drug already. At the start of 2019, their revenue was up by 40% and they had £2.3 billion in the bank. They even binned 5,000 packets of Orkambi while we were campaigning for access, leaving them to sit on a shelf and go out of date rather than give them to people who needed them. And since we won that campaign, as we all know, the world has changed. And in March 2020, we began facing another access crisis, this time on a global scale. And that was with the COVID-19 vaccines. I've spent years watching people I know die as they can't get their hands on life-saving medication, and I wasn't willing to do it again, which is why I decided to get involved with Just Treatment and fight for a people's vaccine. Now companies see the potential for huge sales, they're rushing in, but despite the billions of dollars of taxpayer money that has funded the development of coronavirus medications and vaccines, there's no guarantee they'll be affordable or accessible to anyone who needs them. While in the UK, we're racing ahead with our vaccination programs, many countries in the global south have yet to receive a single dose. Despite all this funding from public money, pharma companies have been given monopolies on these vaccines, and they're using their power to artificially restrict supplies. This means there aren't enough vaccines to go round, and rich countries like the UK are hoarding limited supplies. I have family in India, and right now we're seeing people in India dying by the hundreds of thousands, while the UK blocks efforts to allow more countries to make their own doses. Whilst people are dying, losing loved ones and their livelihoods, big pharma are continuing to profit on our suffering all over again. Right now, we need global solidarity and collectivism, not vaccine nationalism and pharma monopolies. That's why I started a petition, which you should be able to sign if you click on the link that's being shared in the chat box now. Our safety depends on the safety of everyone. Now it's time we fight to demand fair and free access to COVID vaccines and all the life-saving medications globally. Let's not allow market forces to dictate the value of our lives. Drug companies operate by placing monetary value on people's lives, and this is unethical and disgusting. In a situation like the COVID-19 pandemic, where every single person has been impacted by the virus in one way or another, it's cruel to think that some people have decided to make gains and profits on collective suffering. It's sickening. It's happened before, time and again. Just look at the AIDS crisis and how people struggled, and in many countries continue to struggle for access to life-saving drugs for years while pharma companies profited, and we can't allow it to continue and happen again. But we've taken on big pharma and won before. Our plan B or can be campaign shows that we can successfully fight to gain access to essential medications. We did it then, and we can do it now with the COVID vaccine. The pandemic has shown us just how important our healthcare systems are and how vital it is that access to drugs are equitable and fair. This is a global pandemic. We need a global effort in demanding the best for every single person, no matter where they live, and a global effort to challenge a drug development system that is preventing the people who need the drugs from getting them. Thank you.
Izzy, thank you so much. It's so inspirational hearing you speak from the heart about your experience and why you're involved in campaigning to put patients before profit. I'm sure there will be questions for you. Just a reminder to everyone to pop your questions in the chat and then we'll collate them for the Q&A. But first, I'm just going to hand over to James to tell us a bit more about the campaign for a people's vaccine. So over to you, James.
Great, thank you, Miriam, and I'll do my best after to follow on from Izzy. That was really powerful. Thanks, Izzy. So as mentioned, my name is James. I'm an Access to Medicines campaigner with STOPAIDS. STOPAIDS have been working on issues around access to medicines now for over 20 years. But unfortunately, as Izzy highlighted, we're seeing the same play out now for COVID-19. So like Just Treatment, STOPAIDS is part of the People's Vaccine Alliance, a global movement working to ensure that vaccines are produced rapidly and made available for all people free of charge in all countries. So I'm moving on to the next slide, please. So what am I doing here? This is why I'm doing here. Next. So 86% of global vaccines have been administered in the richest countries. By comparison, less than 1% have been given to low-income countries. And we know about the human consequences this carries when looking at the scenes we're seeing in India right now. But it's not just a short-term issue. Projections show it would take potentially up until 2023 for most lower income countries to get access to widespread vaccination. So whilst we're ending lockdown here in the UK and seeing the way out, it's still a few years left for countries to reopen and end the suffering that we're seeing every day. And this isn't just an issue that affects countries in the global south, it hits us home here in the UK too. If we move on to the next slides, it highlights some of the challenges that we've been seeing in the UK over the past couple of years. So for example, last autumn, when we were battling against the second peak of the pandemic, a very promising COVID-19 drug, remdesivir, was forced to be rationed to NHS patients because of limitations over supply. Gilead were holding onto the monopoly and refusing to share it with other manufacturers to produce it at scale, even though the vast majority of the cost of developing the drug was funded by the taxpayer. And in addition, whilst some vaccines like AstraZeneca are charged at cost right now, pharmaceutical executives like Pfizer are eyeing up to charge eye-watering prices very soon for COVID-19 vaccines. So with the threat of repeat vaccinations, it increases the risk of further price gouging by big pharma. But it's really the moral, epidemiological, scientific, and economic case to deal with vaccine apartheid. So if you go into the next slide, this shows the words of Dr. Tedros, the WHO Director General, who recently commented, "The world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure, and the price of this failure will be paid with lives and livelihoods in the world's poorest countries." And if you move on to the next slide, it is a scientific base too. But what we're seeing right now, if we leave vast swathes of the world unvaccinated, that would create new variants of coronavirus. And if there's new variants, there's a high risk that there'll be one or a few that are ineffective against vaccines. So the People's Vaccine Campaign recently did a polling with some leading epidemiologists, and it all gave us that warning. We have to sort it out and sort it out right now. But if you go to the next slide, Whilst we're grappling with the pandemic, as highlighted at the start, there's some corporations making bumper profits off our suffering and off our price tag. So this year alone, there's 9 new billionaires from pharmaceutical companies who are making these eye-watering profits. But unfortunately, it didn't have to be like this. So if you move on, we got here both because of hoarding and secondly, because of the monopolies. Right now, the UK potentially has enough vaccines to vaccinate a whole population over 3 times. So loads of rich countries like the UK at the start of the pandemic bought up the world's supply of leading coronavirus vaccines. But say what you want about that, it didn't have to be like that. What countries shouldn't be doing is fighting over a bigger share of the pie. We should be forcing big pharma to share the recipe. But unfortunately, patents and know-how, not sharing know-how, get in the way of that. What we've seen recently, as Izzy highlighted, that COVID-19 vaccine and treatments developed using public money have been given away to pharma companies to have complete control. So this makes pharma companies the power to decide who makes it, who gets access to it, and at what price they sell it for. And we unfortunately allowed the governments allowed them to do that. So for the 6 front-runner coronavirus vaccines have had over £9.6 billion worth of public funding alone. And the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was 97% publicly funded. It wasn't AstraZeneca, it was us doing the research, but AstraZeneca refusing to share how to make the vaccine. So for example, this creates a situation where there's vaccine producers and factories all around the world sitting idle simply because the pharmaceutical companies aren't sharing the know-how and the recipe to create the vaccine. But our government says a lot. Our government says that they care about global access and global equity. But firstly, they're hoarding vast strays of the vaccine. As I said, they have potentially enough to vaccinate our population over 3 times. And they're relying too much on this charitable scheme called COVAX, which is run by an organization called Gavi that looks to donate and open source and share vaccines. But the issue with COVAX is that it only looks to vaccinate 20% of the world's population in low-income countries. Obviously, we know we need far more than that to guarantee protection, and COVAX doesn't look to increase supply of vaccines either. They have no plan for this. And of course, charity doesn't buy equity. We need sustainable solutions driven by what communities and countries in the global south want. So what can we do about it then? What we need to do is substantially increase the availability and supply of vaccines. But to do this, we must break the big pharma monopolies that currently stand in the way. But there is 2 solutions that I wanted to highlight this evening to address that. They've both been pushed heavily by grassroots campaigners, including Just Treatment. So the CTAP, that's the WHO COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. So this initiative will allow big pharma companies to openly share their patents, the monopolies, the know-how, and the recipe to how to make their vaccine. This will allow us to rapidly scale up supply, but also allow us to accelerate research, including in how to deal with the new variants. By doing this, we will significantly increase supply, but unfortunately, most big pharma companies are refusing to share the know-how and share the recipe with the CTAP. We need to carry on pushing them to work with the CTAP. Secondly, it is the TRIPS waiver. So this is a proposal from India and South Africa at the World Trade Organization to temporarily waive or suspend intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics. So this game-changing proposal would temporarily break up monopolies and bring on to market loads more manufacturers to start production. And it's voluntary, because the country can choose whether to implement it or not. It's now supported by over 100 countries, including the US, which was historically a big blocker for it. But the UK government right now is still attempting to block it from being adopted, which needs to tackle them straight on this. If you move on, so this highlights some of the campaigning we're doing, targeting Boris Johnson to support the intellectual property waiver, including thinking about how much influence they have through being the president of the G7 this year. If you move on, just wanted to highlight a few activities that we have coming up that follow on from some amazing campaigning we've done over the past few months that have been led by grassroots activists around the world. So on Wednesday, trade ministers across some of the richest countries, so the G7, are having their meeting ahead of next month's summit. So we're planning a big demo working with Global Justice Now outside the Department of Trade building in London at 10 a.m. We really welcome any of you be keen to join or happy to share it. I think somebody can post on the chat now the link to sign up. And then over the next few months, there's a bumper load of other key events coming up that will be critical in deciding whether we get a people's vaccine or not. So next month's G7 summit, the World Health Assembly that's starting today, and further meetings of the World Trade Organization. We need everyone right now to mobilize with us and deliver people's vaccine. So really looking forward to the discussion and seeing how many of you are here this evening. Thank you.
James, thank you so much. That was really informative and so exciting to hear about everything that's been happening in the campaign for a people's vaccine. The situation with the COVID vaccine right now demonstrates so clearly why we need to keep challenging Big Pharma's power and standing up for patients. It's been so inspiring hearing from both you and Izzy, so thank you both so much. So now we've got about 10 to 15 minutes for some discussion. Again, if you have a question for either James or Izzy, please post this in the chat box and we'll collate them to put to our two brilliant speakers. We may not be able to get through all the questions, but we're certainly going to do our best. So just to get started, I'm going to ask questions in pairs. So one question for you, James, and one question for Izzy. So James, a question from Mike. So pharma has developed retrovirals for treating and curing AIDS. The drugs are expensive, and that's because it takes 14 years and more to bring to market. Pharma has produced life-saving COVID vaccines in record times, and they will supply to the world, and they'll supply them to the world. Who else would do this? And question for Izzy, so I'll just ask it now and then you can answer it one after the other. So we've all been watching the situation in India unfold with horror. As someone who has friends and family in India, do you think that the crisis there has more to do with the failings of Modi's government or Big Pharma's monopolies on the vaccines? So we'll start with you, James, and then we'll go to Izzy after.
Thank you for that really important question. What I'd say back to that is both considering the really critical role that public funding plays in drugs development, not just for HIV, as you mentioned in your question, coronavirus, but a whole range of other conditions too. There's some research recently that highlighted actually that 2/3 of upfront research into medical conditions is actually funded by the public sector. And in terms of the price for HIV medication and other conditions too, there has been some studies for some of the latest HIV medication that actually shows it is very, very cheap to develop, and pharmaceutical companies were able to quickly cover all of their costs very quickly when it was brought to market. So it's not necessarily true to say that that they had to charge such high prices to recoup their R&D costs. And in terms of coronavirus, you're right, it is a marvel of science that we have so many vaccines brought into market a year into the development. But what led to that, again, the public sector played a much more critical role than what's often talked about in discourse around coronavirus. So, for example, for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, 97% of the costs for that were covered by the public sector, including big contributions from the UK government. So what we're trying to do with our campaigning is to highlight the role of us as taxpayers in getting control around how we ensure access, but still looking and considering the role that the private sector and pharmaceutical companies do play, but looking to work with them collaboratively to guarantee access for their products.
Thank you, James. Izzy, would you like to answer?
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, in regards to the situation in India, there have clearly been massive political failings, but also big pharma's monopolies are limiting the number of available vaccines. India has been calling for the waiver since last autumn, and if it had been enforced since then, we may already be seeing an increase in global supply. And if we look at what may happen in other countries, globally, there aren't enough vaccines to go round, and too many countries are reliant on too few manufacturers. And unless we break these monopolies, then what's happening in India will happen everywhere else. So really, we need an increase in availability and supply. So I think that, yeah, it is a complicated situation, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Izzy. Just a couple more questions. So, sorry, I'm just taking a look at the time. Right, one's coming in. So one for you, Izzy, is what's the main action you'd like to see from the UK government to ensure global access to COVID-19 vaccines? And one for you, James, is what has this got to do with the NHS and its privatisation? If either one of you want to start.
Yeah, sure. I think the main thing that I'd like to see the UK government do is to stop blocking the TRIPS waiver and just start putting patients ahead of pharma company profits. I think that like people's lives are the most important thing, and it's like a shame really that a global pandemic hasn't like made that happen really, because you'd think like before it happened, you'd think that something like this would make people put lives ahead of profit. But yeah, I don't know, that's my opinion.
And in terms of the NHS and the private sector, I think it goes back to highlight how, again, with coronavirus, there's a real risk that we're letting big private companies work to profiteer from the NHS. So what we're seeing now is increasing number of pharmaceutical companies looking to increase their costs of their coronavirus vaccines, which is going to be going up even further. And how in last year, as I mentioned, there was a promising COVID-19 treatment that the NHS was forced to ration because of big pharma monopolies. So we know already the significant funding shortfalls the NHS is facing. So if we're carrying on giving vast amounts of money to big pharma companies to cover the cost of vaccines and drugs that we made ourselves as the public sector, it'd be even harder to deliver NHS New Deal and do all the other things we want to invest our money, like giving more money for nurses and like ensuring access to everyone for healthcare and treatments.
Thank you. Loads of great questions coming in, by the way. Just two last ones, and I think they're both for you, James. So how do we best argue against Boris Johnson when he says that greed by big pharma is responsible for the success of the vaccine rollout? And do you think big pharma or governments are most responsible for a lack of globally available vaccines and treatments?
Great, great questions. In terms of Boris Johnson's, in case anyone missed it, Boris Johnson recently said it was greed and capitalism that have driven the UK's vaccine success. I think the best counter to that, and maybe one thing that Boris Johnson might want to learn about, is to tell the truth of the matter And the truth of the matter is that it took billions of public funding, including from the UK government, to develop the vaccines. As I said, 97% of the cost of the AstraZeneca vaccine research and development was covered by the public sector. And as we know, it was the brilliant NHS that rolled out the vaccine so successfully. We've seen the failings of the private sector in terms of some of the huge contracts we're giving out this year from the NHS to respond to coronavirus vaccines, to coronavirus. But in terms of actually administrating the vaccines, it shows the massive impact that the NHS can deliver when supported. In terms of your second question related to government or big pharma being a cause for some of the issues, I think it's both, but I hold more of the blame to governments, because governments have the power to have done things differently. They have the power to create the market and create the system that would ensure global access. And they should have took different decisions at the start of the pandemic. So we at STOPAIDS, People's Vaccine Alliance and Just Treatment were saying to the government when they were spending billions to fund the development of coronavirus vaccines, we were telling them, you must attach conditions as a pre-requirement to receive a public funding to ensure that vaccine is openly shared with manufacturers around the world and that it's sold at an affordable price. But unfortunately, our governments ceded control over to the pharmaceutical companies and gave away all of their power to ensure global access. And right now, as Izzy and others were highlighting, our government is blocking the TRIPS waiver, so the IP waiver, from being adopted at the World Trade Organization. So we ourselves do have the power to change things, but of course we shouldn't take our eye off the profiteering that the pharmaceutical companies are doing. And I think, as Izzy has highlighted with the brilliant campaigning that Just Treatment have been doing over the years to get access to cystic fibrosis medication and access to cancer medication, is that we know when we come together, we can force change and force them to bring down prices. So I'm hopeful that we can first do the same to push pharmaceutical companies to license through the WHO COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, the CTAP. And there's been some really amazing stuff that I've been following that Just Treatment have been doing on this in terms of bringing together communities to highlight the importance of the CTAP and doing a mass phone-in where everyone was calling up pharma CEOs, asking them to license through the CTAP, which I'm sure many of you took part in as well. So I think we're doing more of that over the coming months. Momentum is behind us now, and I think we can really deliver change if we come together.
Thank you. Thanks again to Izzy and James, and thanks to everyone for your great questions. I certainly feel like I've learned a lot from being here with you all tonight, and feel really inspired by hearing about how we can take on big pharma and the government and win. Stopping big corporations like pharma companies from ripping off our NHS is one of the demands of the New Deal. So by working together to grow the campaign for a New Deal, we are also building a movement of people standing up to overhaul the pharmaceutical industry so that big pharma can no longer hold patients' lives to ransom. I know on the chat, Richard asked a really, really powerful question and really important question. He said, how can we possibly save the NHS when the Tories have such a big majority in Parliament and have been forcing their agenda on us with no regard for what we have to say? We're actually going to explain our campaign strategy in the next section. So thank you so much for your question, Richard. And we're going to address that head on, as I said, in the next section. So I'm now going to hand over to my co-host, Jaman, who's going to run through where we're currently at with the NHS New Deal campaign. So over to you, Jaman.
Great, thanks Mariam, and hi everybody. It's really great to be here, really great to see all the comments in the chat, like the amount of energy there is and all the people who want to be part of winning a fully funded and truly public NHS that works for all of us. It really is inspiring. So just to introduce myself, I'm another Just Treatment leader. I got involved last year. The push for me was that right at the beginning of the pandemic, weeks before actually we went into lockdown, a number of my family and friends came down very badly with COVID. A number were hospitalized and a few died, which was awful. And it was a real wake-up call to how serious the pandemic is. And it was a reminder of how urgently we need to act to stop the spread, and that why we need an NHS that can protect us when you're in that sort of situation. So that's what motivated me to get involved in Just Treatment. So in terms of explaining, as Mariam said, the bigger sort of campaign that this is part of, I'm going to give a brief recap of what we've done in the campaign so far, what we've achieved together, and how the work on Big Pharma fits into the NHS New Deal, as well as these kind of questions that were coming up around what can we realistically do in the UK. So I know there are people on the call who may not know about our NHS New Deal work, how it's been created, where it's come from. So just to explain that quickly, the NHS New Deal is a set of demands that Just Treatment has crowdsourced from views and experiences of NHS patients, so the people who actually are on the front end of this across the UK. Last year, Just Treatment supporters had hundreds of conversations with people in every constituency across the country to get their thoughts on the NHS, to talk about what's good about it, what needs to change. And many more people, many of you, filled out surveys and sent us your ideas for what we could do better. In the end, we had over 1,500 people contributing to the NHS New Deal, which makes it a truly people-powered campaign. Like, it sounds cheesy, but it is. And the New Deal sets out our vision for what a fully funded, truly public NHS, which respects health workers, gives patients the power to shape its future, and ensures everyone gets the quality care we all deserve, actually looks like. So our plan to win a New Deal is based on 3 key facts. Firstly, if politicians want to change things, they can. The pandemic has demonstrated that MPs can do big things, but only if they're under pressure to do so. Secondly, there's a lot of support out there for the NHS. We all know that. We're all part of the millions that were clapping for carers and painting rainbows on our windows. And we need to turn that support into action. And finally, really crucially, politicians care about votes. And many of them won by slim margins, and they know that. That means that we can use that leverage to hold MPs to their promises and to push them. Because if they don't back an NHS New Deal, if there's enough pressure, they'll be nervous. That could mean they could lose in the next election. And that's the really pivotal part that we want to focus on. So what does that mean in practice? So we're going to move to a few slides. So we've got a strategy that focuses on 3 simple principles. Firstly, the idea is to use our NHS stories to bridge the political divide, because the reality is healthcare matters to everybody. It doesn't matter which party you're in. And so whatever people support, the reality is that what happens to the NHS affects them. And so we want to use this to get stories, to engage people everywhere. Secondly, we want to use relationships to move people to action, because what matters more than anyone is who people trust. And we know that people trust what they hear from their friends and family. So the more we can get people engaged, the more we can spread the word, the more we can get to people directly and really get the message across. And then the third aspect is that we'll use people-powered tactics to show the depth of support. And that will help us to build our movement and put concrete pressure on politicians to act. So those are the strong foundations that the NHS New Deal is built upon. The campaign was launched 4 months ago, and since then we've been blown away by the response. Just to give a few examples of what's already happened, we've had nearly 22,000 people across the country adding their names in support of the New Deal. More than 230 people have signed up to become NHS New Deal organisers in their constituencies. Hundreds of supporters have together donated thousands of pounds to help the campaign grow. And the NHS New Deal has been endorsed by 13 organisations and counting, including our friends at STOPAIDS who are here tonight. And as we heard from James, what we're now seeing is the UK government blocking global efforts for a people's vaccine. So there's even more of a need for us to be pushing ahead with our New Deal plans really quickly so that we can start pushing in the way that we need for things that matter for all of us. In the next phase of the campaign, we'll be ramping up efforts at a local level to reach out to our elected politicians and apply pressure on them to back the NHS New Deal. In the coming weeks and months, NHS New Deal organisers will be taking a lead on arranging meetings with MPs in their constituencies to talk to them about the New Deal and persuade them to support it. A big part of these meetings will be about identifying patient stories and testimonials from people within the MPs' constituencies. That's really powerful. It demonstrates to MPs that there are people in their constituencies who care about this. And those stories are one of the strongest tools we have in pressuring them to act. But it's vital that that kind of work doesn't just come from one individual. MPs take these meetings much more seriously if they know there are a lot of people in their constituencies who are talking about, care about the New Deal. That's exactly why we've launched the local petitions as a mechanism for growing that local support. And we're asking organisers to reach at least 50 petition signatures in their constituency before holding MP meetings. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Diane, who'll talk more about what's happening in her London constituency of Bromley and Chislehurst.
Yeah, hi. Well, I'm just going to say what we're doing with, around the NHS New Deal. There's a group of us that we call ourselves the Bromley and Bexley Left Group. We chat on WhatsApp, and one of our one of our group members is very, very interested in the NHS. It always used to confuse me so much when she spoke about it. Privatisation. She used to start the conversations off with telling me how complicated it all was, and in a way that stopped me from listening. And then I did listen. I think I knew it was something I had to get my head round, and I'm still trying to get my head round. Started listening harder, reading more up about it, and watching the right films, the great NHS heist, etc. Heard about the NHS New Deal, like the simplicity of the plan. And what we've been doing is we've been holding street stalls in Bromley, and they've been really successful. We're reaching out to passers-by, we're engaging with them, and they're very interested. It's very good to be able to talk to people and get the response that we're getting. Everybody, it seems, across there is no divide, like you say. It doesn't matter what they vote, really, are interested in the NHS, and they want to know, they have a feeling something's not right, and they want to know more about it. They really were wanting to know more. There was a lot of curiosity. The stall holders, we worked in a market, and the stall holders were also coming up to us and talking to us. It was a completely different experience, really. So we're reaching out to passers-by, and it's a really very good experience, very, energizing. And we took emails, and they were willing to give them for people that live in this constituency. And when I get together on Wednesday and go through the emails, and there were quite a few of them in a very short space of time, we only stood out there for an hour and a half. I think the answer is never plan to do anything for too long, because then people don't turn up. About 15 of us campaigners turned up, and that's a very small group. We were able to infiltrate between the crowds and talk to the people as they were doing their shopping as well. I don't just give out leaflets, it's good to talk to them. We took emails, we dragged them back to the stall, they put their emails down, and we're sending off emails to them. And of course, I'm going to talk about the NHS New Deal in the emails that we send to them. And they're very interested in our Tory MP, Bob Neal, and they would love to get onto a Zoom call with him. That's what they want to do. Lots of them wanted to be involved. They were, what can we do? Hasn't it been sold off already? And it was just a very good experience. Just to say another thing, on my morning walk, I go out for a walk every morning for about 15 minutes, usually, and I make sure I deliver 20 leaflets with a personal letter through people's doors. Again, I just think it's better to do it like that. I just go out every morning anyway, and on my walk there's always 20 doors to post letters through. So I make it personal, because that's what NHS New Deal have suggested. I put my name down, say I live in this constituency. and they've got all the details there about the NHS New Deal. I mean, I think basically it's raising awareness and letting people know what's happening, because they don't know. One of our locals, what really instigated this is one of our local surgeries has been taken over by Centene. So of course that's another really good hook, the fact that the bank surgery round the corner, well, not round the corner, it's just we couldn't really do it there because it really hasn't got passing, no footfall. So, but everyone knows of Farnborough bank surgery, so we were talking about that as well. And it's raising awareness and letting people know what's happening, and they really don't like what's happening. They really don't like it. And of course, as you said before and touched upon, if MPs know that people don't like it, it will influence their policies. Pressure is good. We've seen that happen. We've seen that happen over this whole past year. Marcus Rashford springs to mind, of course. And the whole country needs to know about this. And what we're doing as a very small group, you know, we're very anxious, and you know, we're saying ourselves, we've got to, you know, obviously everybody's got to be doing it. There are small towns, there are big towns everywhere. Everyone can find somewhere to do it. And the more people that know, the more people, you know, people in Parliament will know that we know, and they've got to be pressured. And of course, I like the plan that once we've got a certain amount of signatures, you're going to sort of start organising. We can organise together to get the local MP on board, and we will see what he has to say about it all. That's it, really.
Great, thank you, Diane. That is really, really great. I think having those kinds of examples of what people can do is so, so powerful. And I think it's true, like we all know, people talk about the NHS in the pub, they talk about it in the office, like people are upset and they want something to do. So this helps us bring people together and actually just make things change. So that's part of what this is all about, which is why we're all here. So in doing this kind of work, the kind of work that Diane's just described, we're gonna be looking at opportunities to tell our families, our friends, our neighbours, the truth about what's happening to the NHS, because we know that it's not, we can't just expect them just to know everything by themselves. Sometimes people have experienced something bad, but they don't necessarily understand context or what's behind it, or what they can even do about it. We can't just rely on the government and the media. We have to spread the word ourselves about what the government is doing, and that it actually is putting the profits of private companies over the needs of patients, over our needs. So how are we going to do this, and how can you all get involved? I'm going to hand back over to Miriam to provide some answers.
Thank you so much, Damon. It's clear there's never been a more important time to fight for an NHS that is there for all of us. So for this to happen, we need as many people as possible to take action, and there's so many on the call, so hopefully all of us can do something. So off the back of this call, there are two key things that we really, really need people to do. Number one, we need people to step up to build local pressure on their MP, just like Diane was talking about. And number two, we need everyone to help spread the word about how big pharma are ripping off the NHS and putting patients at risk. If you haven't done so already, here's how you can get stuck in right away tonight. Just a flag, we will temporarily pause the chat function so the links we're about to post don't get lost. So on the first point about pressuring MPs, we're now posting a link in the chat box. This link will take you to a simple form you can fill in to say you will step up to organise in your constituency for an NHS New Deal, like Diane is doing in London. It's these local organisers who are going to take the lead on arranging the local meetings with their MPs in the coming weeks and months. So thanks to everyone on the call who has already made this commitment. It'd be amazing if as many more people as felt able could step up tonight. It doesn't matter if you've never done anything like this before, we will provide you with all the training, resources and support that you need every step of the way. We've actually already had over 230 people step up to organise so far in this campaign, which is incredible. But with 650 constituencies, we're going to need many, many more. So if you think this is something you might be able to do, please click on the link in the chat and fill out the form. We need to hear from you now. But we know not everyone will be able to take on the role like this, and there's still other vital actions that need doing in terms of spreading the word to your friends, family and neighbours about the New Deal campaign. One of our brilliant volunteer leaders, Daniel, has made a really powerful video about Big Pharma and how they're abusing their monopolies to make vast profits at the expense of patients. We're actually going to show this video to you now. Fingers crossed. Hope. Amazing. Thanks so much again to Daniel for making this brilliant video. We want to make sure that people far and wide watch it and understand how Big Pharma's business model is putting lives at risk. So we're going to post some links in the chat right now. They will take you to our posts of the video on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're on any or all of these social media platforms, we really need you to click on the links and share and retweet the post to help spread the word. If you're not on social media, you can still watch the video via these links and share the links with your friends on email. You'll be helping to explain to people the problem with Big Pharma while spreading the word about the NHS New Deal at the same time. If everyone here tonight could commit to either stepping up to become a local organiser or to sharing the video, or even both if you're feeling really raring to go, you'd be making a huge impact on the fight for a fully funded and truly public NHS that works for all of us. We know that there's huge support and love out there for our NHS, but together we need to turn that support into concrete action, which can hold our politicians to account and ensure that our NHS works for everyone. We can win a better future for our NHS and for patients across the UK, but only if enough people get involved and we all step up to play our part. So with that, we've come to the end of the call. Thanks so much to our speakers, Izzy and James, and thank you to my co-host, Jamon. But above all, thank you so much to each and every one of you who took the time to join us here tonight. Whether you're already actively involved or you're new to the campaign, it's so brilliant to have you on the board. So thanks again for joining us. Let's get out there and get thousands more signed up to the NHS New Deal campaign so that we can organise to win an NHS where private profits are never put before patient health. Bye everyone and have a great night. Stay safe and we'll see you again soon.